the wind moved through the empty gardens of Thornfield Manor like a soft warning, cold and restless, carrying the scent of dying leaves and approaching winter. The great stone house stood alone beneath the gray sky, tall and proud yet hollow, as though all warmth had been drained from it long ago. Once, this manor had been filled with music, laughter, and light. Now its windows stared blankly across the moors, and its long halls echoed only with silence. Within this cold house lived its master, Adrian Blackwood, Duke of Thornfield. At 30 years of age, he was known throughout the county as the Silent Duke. Servants spoke of him only in whispers. He moved through his own home like a shadow, speaking little, noticing nothing, keeping the world at a careful distance. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, and his pale gray eyes seemed empty of feeling. No one could remember the last time they had seen him smile. On this late autumn evening, Adrian sat alone in his study. The fire burned low, though the room remained cold. Papers lay scattered across a wide oak desk, matters of land, rent, and tenants, yet his eyes drifted again and again to the rain sliding down the window. He had built this silence carefully, believing it was the only way to survive. Love, he had learned, brought only pain. Far to the south, in a smaller and warmer house, Eleanor Ashworth sat at her piano. She was 28, with soft brown hair and kind hazel eyes. Music had always been her comfort, her way of speaking when words failed. That morning, her father had stood before her, pale and trembling, and told her the truth. Their money was gone, their home would soon be lost, and there was only one solution. The Duke of Thornfield needed a wife. Eleanor knew his name. Everyone did. The silent widower who lived like a ghost. Her father spoke of duty and safety, of debts paid and honor preserved. Eleanor heard only fear. Still, she agreed. To refuse would ruin them both. The wedding took place on a gray December day. The chapel was cold. Eleanor wore her mother's ivory gown, her hands trembling as she stood beside a man who did not look at her. Adrian spoke his vows in a flat, emotionless voice. When he placed the ring upon her finger, his touch was brief and distant. Eleanor searched his face for anything, a glance, a sign, but found nothing. After the ceremony, there was no joy, no laughter, only a quiet meal in a vast dining room. Adrian sat far from her, eating little, speaking not at all. When it ended, he left without a word. That night, Eleanor was shown to her own rooms. The servants were kind but careful, their eyes full of pity. She sat alone on a bed meant for a wedding night that would never come and finally allowed herself to cry. Her dreams were gone. In their place stood cold stone walls and a husband who treated her like a stranger. The days that followed were worse than she had imagined. Adrian avoided her entirely. They passed one another in hallways without speaking. He took his meals alone. Eleanor tried at first to greet him, to speak of simple things, the weather, the house, but each attempt was met with silence or a stiff nod. Eventually, she stopped trying. Loneliness filled every corner of Thornfield, yet Eleanor refused to break. She rose each morning and walked the frozen gardens alone. In the afternoons, she explored the manor until one day she discovered a forgotten music room. Dust coated the furniture. A piano stood silent beneath a cloth. She cleaned the room herself and sat at the keys. The sound was imperfect, but it was enough. Music filled the empty space. From that day forward, she played every afternoon, pouring her sadness into melody. What Eleanor did not know was that her music traveled through the halls. It reached a man who pretended not to hear. Adrian began to pause in his work, to stand still in corridors. He told himself it meant nothing, yet night after night the sound followed him, stirring. Memories he had buried deep. His first wife, Cassandra, had been beautiful and cruel. She mocked his tenderness, laughed at his love, betrayed him openly. When she died in an accident, Adrian felt only relief and shame. He swore never to be vulnerable again. Eleanor had been meant as duty, nothing more. Winter settled over Thornfield. Weeks passed. Eleanor grew thinner and quieter, yet never bitter. She showed kindness to the servants and spoke gently. Mrs. Brennan, the old housekeeper, watched her with concern and respect. One evening, Eleanor made a small request. She asked Adrian if they might dine together once a week for appearances. He hesitated, then nodded. Their first dinner was silent and painful. Still, Eleanor counted it as a victory. Not long after, Eleanor realized she was with child. The news filled her with both joy and fear. When she told Adrian at their weekly dinner, he froze. He listened, nodded once, then stood and left without speaking. Eleanor sat alone, her hand resting on her stomach, tears falling. Her child would be born into silence. From that day on, she spoke to her baby when alone. She told stories. She sang at first softly, then with growing strength. Lullabies her mother once sang to her became her refuge. And someone was listening. Each evening, Adrian found himself standing outside the music room. He told himself he was only passing by, yet he stayed. Her voice filled him with something he had not felt in years: hope, shame, longing. One night during a fierce storm, he witnessed Eleanor comforting a frightened young maid who had dropped a tray of dishes. Eleanor knelt despite her pregnancy, spoke gently, showed mercy where punishment was expected. Something broke inside him. Later that same night, Eleanor sang a lullaby to her unborn child, promising love and warmth. Adrian stood in the dark, tears burning his eyes. He understood with terrible clarity that Eleanor expected nothing from him. She would be both mother and father. The weight of his cruelty crushed him. Before he could stop himself, he pushed the door open. The hinge creaked. Eleanor turned, startled, fear flashing across her face. Adrian stood frozen, months of silence locking his throat. At last, 2 words escaped him, rough and broken. "Continue, please." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She hesitated, then sang again. Adrian sat and listened. For the first time, he did not turn away, and in that quiet room, as her voice rose and fell like a promise, the ice around his heart began to crack. From that night forward, a quiet change settled over Thornfield Manor. So gentle it might have gone unnoticed by anyone who did not live within its walls. Adrian did not speak to Eleanor the next morning, nor the one after, yet each evening, as the house grew still, he appeared outside the music room. Sometimes he entered and sat in silence. Sometimes he lingered by the door. Always he listened. Eleanor never asked him to stay. She never asked him to speak. She simply sang. At first, her voice trembled when she felt his presence, unsure whether this fragile peace would shatter if she acknowledged it too directly. But as days passed, she grew calmer. Singing to her unborn child became her strength, songs of safety and love, of spring after winter, of a home filled with warmth. Adrian heard every word, and each cut deeper than the last. The servants noticed. Whispers spread through the halls. The silent Duke was changing. As Eleanor's pregnancy advanced, Adrian watched her closely. When she nearly slipped on the stairs one afternoon, he reached out without thinking and steadied her arm. The brief contact left them both shaken. Eleanor whispered a soft thank you. Adrian nodded and walked away, his heart pounding. Their first real conversation came days later in the music room. "The child," he said quietly. "Does the child move often?" Eleanor smiled. "Yes, especially when I sing. She listens." He heard it clearly, a daughter. He placed his hand where Eleanor guided it. Beneath his palm, the baby kicked. Adrian gasped, tears filling his eyes. Life, once distant, was suddenly real. From that day on, words came slowly but steadily. Walks in the garden, quiet conversations in the evenings. Eleanor spoke of music, of hope. Adrian spoke of duty and fear. When Eleanor asked about his first wife, he did not turn away. He told her the truth. She listened without judgment. "We were both wounded," she said gently, "but wounds do not have to define us." Spring softened the land. Warmth returned to Thornfield. Adrian read aloud in the evenings. Flowers filled the halls. When Eleanor went into labor, Adrian refused to leave her side. He held her hand through hours of pain. When their daughter was born, healthy and crying, Adrian wept openly. "I love you," he whispered. "I think I always have." "I know," Eleanor said. The silent Duke was silent no more. Years later, sunlight filled the music room. Catherine danced. Thomas laughed. Little Margaret clapped from Adrian's lap as Eleanor sang softly beside him. No one who saw them now would believe how it had begun. "Tell us again," Catherine said. "How you and Mama met." Adrian smiled. "Your mother saved me," he said. "She taught me that love does not shout. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it sings." Later, Eleanor rested her head against his shoulder. "Love is not way-ness," she said. "It is courage." And Thornfield Manor, once cold and silent, stood as proof that even the longest winter can give way to spring.